It's now 6:30 on the dot. I'm calling to order the Lewes Planning Commission meeting of what? Okay. I believe it's 6:30 on the dot. I'm calling to order the meeting of the Lewes Planning Commission of Wednesday, January 17th, 2024. First of all, I want to say Happy New Year. We haven't been together since the New Year. It may seem a little kind of out of date now, but it's our first meeting of 2024. I did want today to switch around an item on, well, two items on the agenda. First is the minutes, and I'd like to bring them up to the front. And then second, we'll go for public comments after that. So if anyone is online, I don't see anyone online, wanted to give you forewarning that we will open the floor up to public comments in a minute. So why don't we first turn to our minutes, and we have two sets of minutes to review. They were quite meaty in terms of length and content. And I know that I had several edits to them, and these were primarily of, like just editing. On page 1 of November 15th minutes, under B3, I think it's Mr. Burns stated that if a judge were to review the commission's decisions, not analysis the commission's decisions. And then on page 2, Mr. Elder was present and provided documents for review that pertained to the plus process and did not refer to any individual application. Did anyone have any other comments or changes to this? No, there were. Okay.
Yeah, I had one. On page 3 of those, page 25.
Wait. I think you're on the next one.
Am I? Okay.
There's a 2-page set of minutes that we're reviewing first. It's November 15th
Okay.
special meeting minutes. Sorry.
Right. Sorry.
So I think we need to vote on these individually.
Okay.
Do I hear a motion?
I make a motion to accept the meeting notes as amended.
I second that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, now on to the next set of minutes, which were from the regular meeting minutes of November 15th. And you had a comment on 25, is it, Bob? Page 25?
Yeah,
I-
just that Clara Lane.
I had a comment on page 2.
Okay,
So just to make
Go
it
ahead.
easier for Jackie, if we go through in order.
go ahead.
Again, I just had some minor editorial things that I can pass Janelle to you to give to Jackie.
Yes.
But under Chairwoman Stacy reviewed, and I would say, a list of possible conditions that were raised primarily through the public hearing and through public comment. And then let's go on to page 3. Over to you, Bob.
Number 5, there's Clara Lane and Claire Lane,
Oh, yes.
and I think they're the same.
And I think it's Clara, isn't it?
It's
Yes,
his
okay.
daughter.
And then, I don't know whether you noticed, Commissioner Heffernan, but both you and former Commissioner Mehta, it appears no one could hear you when you were voting. And so throughout this set of minutes, it's kind of in red, and I'm not sure how we handle that situation. Janelle?
If you want to delay voting, and I can try and work with Jackie on trying to figure out what was said, and I can go back and listen and see if I can pick something up.
I voted
Okay.
yes.
Yes.
Okay. Because of the importance of this vote, I think if we can have the stated reason, it becomes, it's something that we are to state a reason, and so it would be useful to have that. And that appears on, basically on each of the votes throughout the document. Then on page 7 or page 29, we've had the minutes from October 18th postponed since our November meeting. And we're now reviewing November minutes before getting those October 18th done. So I just want to refer that to Janelle to follow up on, because I don't like to have us go,
No, I've reached out to Jackie, and I just haven't heard a response yet.
It's been a year. I'm happy someone appreciates these, Charlie. Okay. My husband no longer does, so. Any other comments on this set of minutes? Okay. We're going to, we won't be, I won't be looking for a motion on these because we'll be trying to resolve these issues. The next set are the minutes from the special meeting minutes of November 21st. And I have to say, this confirmed in my mind how important minutes are, because at the bottom of page 1, it says, Chairwoman Stacy requested council at a future meeting explain the levels of recommendations from the plus comments and how these are not legal requirements that must be met. And to maybe I have failing knowledge after a great New Year's Eve celebration, but I don't believe we did that last year. And I think it would still be a good idea to do this year. So I'm just looking to our city planner and our council to get together and figure out the best way of making that happen at next month's meeting. Mm-hmm. Then any other comments? My next comment isn't, no, that was the comment on the, any other comments on the minutes from this meeting? I didn't have any others. Okay, and I believe, I'm just looking to make sure this wasn't a set where there were any red, no. I think everyone could be heard on this one. Do I have a motion?
I make a motion to accept the minutes for November, the special meeting.
A second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The minutes are passed. Okay, we'll now go back to the beginning of our agenda, and as I mentioned, I want to open it to public comment at the beginning. So if there is any public comment, please come forward to the microphone and give your name and address, and if there's anyone online, please raise your hand. No? We'll give it another second. No one's online. No one's online, so I don't think we need to wait for them. Okay. Okay. We'll move on to unfinished business. B1, and I'm afraid occasionally something can slip through the cracks, and this is what happened here to my knowledge. B1 is discussion and possible recommendation to mayor and city council regarding the referral of 3 potential amendments to the adopted ordinance, Ordinance 13-22 Annexation Regulations from the mayor and city council. And these were regulations that we made a recommendation, sent it to city council, and they came back asking us to consider further, I believe, the width of the driveway and accessories, I mean, these items that we've looked at. Now, we had this discussion at an earlier meeting. At that point in time, we had agreement on these, but we never actually formally voted on it. And so I hope everyone has read this over, because my first question is, are there any additional comments on this? Otherwise, I think we should be able to move fairly quickly to make a recommendation to send this to mayor and city council.
Madam Chair, I have a comment, but I don't know if it's out of order, in that it's not related to what was attached here, but I reread the whole annexation description, and in C1, it says title and non-title, referencing all, but everywhere else, it just says title. So does that mean it's always title and non-title?
Sorry, I'm not sure where you're looking on
When you,
C1.
so when you look in the actual annexation, when you look at the full document, not
Yeah,
just
okay,
the ones,
mhm.
only in one reference point did I see that it's called out title and non-title. Everywhere else, it just says title. And so, do we have to clarify?
Interesting.
I don't know why it was different. Everywhere else that I could find, it just said title. So I thought the reference meant non-title and title, but I'm always amazed at how words make such a difference. And
Right.
so if we don't say non-title and title everywhere, are we saying something we didn't mean to say?
Or leaving out
Or
something
leaving
that
out
we didn't want to
something?
leave out.
Right, so I know it's not
So-
on this, but it forced me to read the whole thing, and
Now, I don't know whether you need a moment to read this over, or,
Yeah, I think any more clarity and description you can add is better, because if there's not a title versus non-title distinction, then a property owner is going to argue for an interpretation of
Fine.
how they'd like to read it.
right. I mean, my preference from conversations we've had on the Environmental Subcommittee is to start saying both.
yeah.
And so, you can always ask for waivers, but if we don't put them both in,
You know,
Now-
I know historically that's been a point of contention, more in the county perhaps than even in the city of Lewes. But, my preference will always be for both,
yeah, mine
for
too.
all wetlands.
Yeah.
So can I turn to Janelle and/or Alex to quickly draft what we would need to vote on this evening to send that forward with these others to mayor and city council?
So I think it's actually a larger issue,
Okay,
that if you're gonna touch title and non-title in the code, do it holistically and not piecemeal, so we don't miss anything. Because there are two different references, and one is how you calculate how you calculate open space, is that you can't use title or non-title, and then the one is how you calculate density. That one's specific to title. And I know that in your wetland section, there's other sections, so I think if you look at it holistically and wanna look at wetlands in a larger manner, I think that's how it would be more appropriate to view.
can we, let's put this down as an agenda item for our next meeting then. See, our next meeting is already developing.
So just to clarify, Janelle, you're saying that we should be looking at it throughout the entire code, not just in the annexation code?
Well, so you look at it in 197.
Okay.
Because
Yes.
you've got a wetland section of code, which I know the environmental subcommittee is looking at, and then you have a couple of references in the annexation zones, and I don't want to miss if it's sprinkled somewhere else, that we want to make sure we look at it holistically and we don't miss anything.
And I have to say, one thing I've learned on this commission is do not rush to make a change to code without having time to truly read it over and think about it, so.
But would it hurt to amend this while we're looking at it tonight? I mean, we know that the Environment Subcommittee is looking at wetlands, and that's on our agenda for this year, so we're gonna be picking up a lot of other places. But it would be nice not to have to amend this portion of the code or send to city council a recommendation to amend this portion of the code.
I mean, my own preference is to wait because I think we need to make sure that we've really read through this in context, even in the section that we're talking about. And I don't think there's someone coming forward in the next week that this would have a,
And you're delaying by a month.
yes,
correct? That's
exactly,
all.
yeah, exactly. Okay. Do I hear a motion?
I have a comment
Okay.
on,
Oh, perfect.
another, on B2H, one of the proposed changes. So it's on the next page, I believe. It references the 10-foot width driveway for front-loaded. And I think we should specify that that's for side-loaded garages only. In other words, we're trying to discourage front-loaded garages.
Yes.
Right, right. That's a good point. So if we say that's only for side-loaded garages, that would be more specific.
And do you have a suggestion of the wording here?
Yes.
Or shall we
the
ask Janelle?
10-foot front-loaded garages for side-loaded, I'm sorry, front-loaded driveways for side-loaded garages only.
Are front-facing garages prohibited?
Yes.
They are elsewhere, okay.
Okay, have you captured that, Janelle?
Yes.
Okay. Any other comments, questions, or changes? Now I'll look for a motion
With that proposed
with,
change.
stating, including the proposed change. Yeah.
Okay, I propose that we accept these minor changes to the annexation code with the amended section on driveway widths.
I'd second that.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. And we'll be sending this forward now to mayor and city council. Okay, we're now on to C1. Discussion and possible recommendation to mayor and city council on a recommendation from the Environmental Subcommittee regarding a proposed amendment to Chapter 197, zoning section 55C, building height, to eliminate the calculation of building height in flood-prone areas. And let me turn to the chair of the Environmental Subcommittee
Okay.
to give us some background or comments.
Okay, and I'm going to ask our city planner, as we go through each one, to introduce it. But what I wanted to really explain is part of our scope, the nice, easy part of our scope, was to look at areas of the code that maybe conflicted or even were leftover clauses every time you amend, something hangs. So the very first one you see under C1 is an administrative cleanup. It's like a hanging paragraph that just didn't make sense from an old code. So that's administrative. C2 is clarity. One of the things, and my colleague Barbara Curtis spent so many hours before we realized that she was trying to modify FEMA code. We didn't realize how much of this was FEMA. Both of us were new to that. And so we thought no one else should go through what we went through. So that's a modification of clarity that says, buyer beware. You can't negotiate this part. And then C3 is a discussion about commercial, a freeboard and building height. So what I want to say is that's substantive. They're all important, but that's more substantive. But I'll let our city planner introduce as we go through each one.
So thank you. The first one to amend section 197, 55C building height. What this does is there's a section in code that I'm going to tell you has never really been enforced because it has a certain pitch of a roof line that's supposed to be calculated in the flood-prone areas. It also references the flood-prone areas as the R2 and the R2H, which is, they are not. The formerly Lewes Beach District is now R3 and R3H. So when that happened, when the district changed, there was a typo that referenced this, which makes this kind of very difficult to enforce because of the typo. And how the city has always calculated building height is based on the center line of the street. So the removal of this doesn't harm any property, doesn't impact any property. It's just really a cleanup so that it's clear that how the city calculates building height is as it's identified in A.
Any questions on this? Do we have a motion?
I make a motion that we accept this amendment or revision to the code.
Second?
I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Okay. And let's move forward to the next one.
So this is an amendment to section, the floodplain regulations, 197-72. In the purposes, it's to add a line that says the floodplain code is based on the FEMA model ordinance to ensure compliance with FEMA regulations. As the city is part of the CRS, the Community Rating System, and the NFIP, the National Flood Insurance Program, the city adopts FEMA's floodplain regulations with very few modifications. And as Commissioner Marasco stated, there was a little confusion as to why is some of this verbiage in the code that really does not apply to the city. It's because it's the model ordinance from FEMA. So this just really clarifies that everybody understands the city did not create their own floodplain regulations. The city adopted FEMA's floodplain regulations.
Any questions or comments on this? Okay, I'm going to turn and look further down the road here because I know that Commissioner Moser has been doing heavy lifting on motions. Do we have a motion to?
Yes, I would like to recommend the adoption of this, and and just a comment, it makes imminent sense for this to be consistent with the FEMA regulations. So I'm strongly in favor of this.
Okay. A second?
Second?
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous?
Right.
Now on to the one that may have more discussion.
Yes. So if you recall, the cities the planning commissions had recommendations and discussions about freeboard as it relates to residential zones. As they were going through the subcommittee, the environmental subcommittee was like, oh, we took care of the residential, but we need to address the commercial. So they spent a good time having multiple discussions, multiple motions, discussing what the appropriate freeboard would be for commercial. What they have proposed is all voluntary. If you are currently in the floodplain, of course, we do have a freeboard, or you can dry flood proof. You can flood proof the buildings. But what they are proposing is an additional 18 inches, which again, for most of your commercial, industrial, and institutional, your community facilities, your building height is 40 feet. So if you do an additional 18 inches, which would get you to 36, you can go up to 42 feet in building height. And then if you are outside the 1% and you're in the 0.2%, you do 18 inches, you can go up to 42 feet in height. And then if you're outside of the floodplain and do 18 inches of freeboard, then you can go up to 42 feet in building height. So it was trying to recognize, okay, if you're in the floodplain, we want you to get up to 36 and you get 2 extra feet. If you're in the 0.2%, 18 inches gets you to 42 feet. And then if you're outside of the floodplain, you do 18 inches, you get up to 42 feet. So they thought that was a fair item. And they also, again, it's voluntary unless you're currently in the floodplain regulations where you get 40 feet. And then the building height does not increase if you're flood proofing the building.
Can I ask a question? I always try to think of what are odd situations that might occur. If you are putting an addition on your home and your home is built to a height higher than 42 feet because either it's a very old home that was grandfather or built to that height before the regulations, or because of the rule that if you're within so many feet of another house that's, if you're locked in between two houses that are very high, you were allowed to go up. if you add 18 feet of freeboard, are you?
Inches.
Inches. I
Sorry,
don't want
sorry,
that on the
18,
record.
excuse me. It's okay. I meant inches, guys.
We're never gonna
Now,
pass
that would be a very tall flood-proof building, okay? On stilts. No. If you add 18 inches, are you still just going to 42? Or are you going to what you had been allowed to? Or are you going to what you had been allowed to, plus the 18 inches?
So you would get, because if you're non-conforming, you can't increase a non-conformity without a variance from the Board of Adjustment.
Okay.
So you could get to the 42.
Okay, thank you.
Also,
Any other?
well, I just want to comment that, and this is commercial we're talking about, but the same thing for residential, in talking to builders. When you, whether you voluntary, which is what this is, or if an ordinance is passed on residential to go from 18 to 36.
Sorry, on commercial, yeah.
Yeah,
Same-
so we're on
same
commercial,
issue,
but the
though.
same
Yeah.
issue. The difference in cost of an 18-inch to a 36-inch is not significant, and we verified that with other builders. So if you have a house fire, if you have a fire in a commercial building, and you want to protect your building, you're gonna rebuild certain zones, you have to go the 18. But if you go to the 36, it is not a significant cost, and if you have flood insurance, the ICC part of that is $30,000, which pretty much covers that. So I think there's been kind of a myth out there that, oh my goodness, 18 to 36, commercial or residential, when in fact, it's not a significant cost to put yourself back into the code to be compliant if the mayor and city council
If you're
adopt it.
building new.
If you're building new or you're
rebuilding
or significant
after a
renovation.
disaster.
That's right.
So even if you're raising a home.
Yes, yes.
So
The cost of raising home, there's that cost,
Yeah.
but the 18 to 36,
is nominal.
it really is.
So my question would be, why did we settle on the 18 rather than the 36?
So that there was a lot of discussion throughout the subcommittee about what was most appropriate. Again, in code today, you have a freeboard of 18 inches, commercial, residential, and then with this commercial, as this is proposed, it's voluntary. If you want to do an extra 18 inches for a total of 36, you get 2 feet of building height. There was a lot of discussion about Dairy Queen. Dairy Queen burns down. Dairy Queen's most likely going to flood-proof that building because you don't want to go up, a flight of stairs to get into Dairy Queen.
Right.
So it's like finding that balance because commercial and residential are insured differently, they function differently. So their costs are looked at differently. So that's why.
And I
it
also
was-
would say devil's advocate, that is, it's according what the culture of your community is, that if you're in a community that floods a lot, you would have a ramp, and it's not unusual that you would have a Dairy Queen that's
Right.
elevated up 5 feet, and, just
What I think the conversation, Commissioner evolved, as Janella said, we don't have a huge industrial commercial practice. Some of these codes apply to 2 buildings,
Yeah.
okay? One is the hospital, or one is a church or something. So all of a sudden, you're looking at things that actually don't have huge application, like residential. But the commercial businesses need customers, and so they build accordingly to the customer need. So if you're a medical building, you're gonna have a ramp anyway, because your customers might need a ramp.
Right.
And you're right, Dairy Queen they're gonna wanna serve ice cream without people getting their feet wet, of course. But they'll make their own business models. They also have access to different kind of insurance. They use their base floors differently than homes do. Some of them can do inventory, move it up quickly. Some of them use garage. It's so varied that our subcommittee went round and round. And finally, we said, let's do voluntary because business people make business decisions to save money. And so this gives them some flexibility. The other thing that I wanted to mention is the 2-foot increase. Builders have told us individually to committee members, without increasing to that additional 2 feet, not giving that carrot, and I'm not using building terms, buildings become squatty. Okay, so what happens is you get this elevation, you get this squatty building, and you don't have any room. So like for residential, you want the increase in the height, so you could design a house with higher ceilings. You know, there's lots of flexibility. That 2 feet is not huge, but it gives the designer so many different options, including for industrial buildings too.
Thank you.
Other questions?
My question, I think, is something that Janelle will be able to answer. It falls in your wheelhouse. Regarding the FEMA insurance program, is that program applicable or available for commercial properties, or is it strictly residential?
I'm gonna look to Brent, because I think it's for both. But Brent Jett from GMB can verify.
It's a different level, but it's commercial flood insurance.
But so there's a FEMA program for commercial properties, is that
yeah.
correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
and as the code stands now, you're required to meet the BFE,
Base flood elevation.
the base flood elevation, and flood proof it at the base flood elevation, or provide 18 inches of freeboard now for
So that
commercial
helps
as
to
well.
explain what Commissioner Marasco was speaking to, correct?
Mhm,
So you-
correct.
Thank you.
So if you don't flood proof, if you're just building a surf shop with a wooden floor,
Right.
you would build it up 18 inches as required by code now. What this does is give you, if you build it up to 36, you get the 2 feet of height extra.
Mm-hmm.
Growing to the sky. Thank you very much.
Other questions?
Thank you.
And I don't mean to put anybody on the spot on this, because I should know the answer myself. But with looking at the projected flooding of our flood zones, down on the beach area, looking at the NOAA maps, which are pretty specific, do we know what the projected what the flood levels are going to be within the next 10, 20 years? And is 36 inches even even on a voluntary basis going to be adequate to be able to address what NOAA is predicting is going to be the flood levels in that area?
I'm going to have Brent answer, but let me first say, for those of us who went to the Rascal conference today, they drew a line through Delaware and said, if you live east of the middle of Delaware, by 2050, you're underwater. I mean, it's disturbing. NOAA, just in case there's public or others who don't know, NOAA is traditionally the most conservative modeler. So Brent will tell you what NOAA says. And so my answer to you is it's probably not enough, but I also think incremental changes are how communities can start to move, which is why I think, and I will let you answer, I think it's going to be critical if the mayor and city council pass these ordinances that they fund a little bit of public education. So if you were building a building, commercial, industrial, or residential, why not build a little bit higher? And so I think we've got to get the truth out without, and our committee was so worried that if we went too far, maybe it couldn't pass. So this isn't the last time an environmental subcommittee will address this. But I think that public education point, as Commissioner Ennis is making, to explain the NOAA model is critical. But I'll turn it to Brent. That's just my personal view.
All right, so I'll try not to get too far in the weeds. So the base flood elevation is what FEMA comes up with when they run their models. Our last revision here was 2015. Mm-hmm. Think of computers 10 years ago. That's what they were running it on. The next model will be exponentially better. I mean, you can almost do on your phone what they were doing in 2015 on a computer. The models get closer, they get tighter, and they're conservative, they round. So if you're in base flood elevation 8, Their model may have come up with 7.1, but they don't put decimal points. So they rounded that 7.1 to 8. So there's already a little bit of extra baked in to that 8. That 8 is a 1% chance it happens in a year. Meets or exceeds that. Full disclosure, we have not hit that number in Lewes. Doesn't say it's not going to happen. Our chance of it occurring is still 1. It's going to happen at some point, just don't know when. The 18 inches of freeboard, there's a lot of factors that go into that. One of the biggest ones is that gets you the prime rate for insurance. So if you meet the 18 inches of freeboard, you're going to pay $1,000 a year. If you build it to the BFE, you're going to pay $3,000 a year. And that's passed on to the homeowner. That's not you guys paying it. It's not any subsidies, anything like that. Building to 3, that might get you to $750. But it also gets credit to the CRS program to
Right.
get from level 9 to level 8. So everybody gets an additional discount. So there's a lot of moving parts in it. The 18 inches was kind of a tickle point. That was easily accepted because it was 2 rows of block. It was just when people were building, and then nationwide, it was 2 rows of block and a flood vent. That was swallow. It was an easy pill to swallow. 36 now is kind of the new one, builds in a little bit more. People have the thought process, well, if I'm going to 36, I can park underneath. This is commercial. People are going to make business decisions. If they don't have anything on the floor that can get wet, they might build to the BFE and floodproof. But this gives them that decision making. And the more and more we talk about it, the more and more we're here and in front of people and educating, then people can make better decisions. So that's kind of the long and short of it.
But for Noah's model specifically,
So Noah's a little more gloom and doom.
yes.
They always have been, because they don't want to come back and be told, well, you said it was going to be 8 and it was 8.2. Well, we never get exactly a 100-year storm. We're going to end up with a 132-year storm or whatever it is, and it will exceed that at some point.
So fundamental to the recommendation was FEMA rules we've accepted. 18 inches freeboard is pretty much standard everywhere. So on a voluntary basis, except in the floodplain, we were saying 18 inches more for residents and builders, commercial stuff built to their risk tolerance. And the fact is that a lot of people build higher now. And they do it because they want to park underneath or have a little more storage space or something like that. And so it's not like we have to guess exactly how many years of we're here on the red bar on the chart and we're safe for this exact amount of time, because individual choices will make us do things better. And a lot of people already are. But to the point you're at, if you have a house and you have 18 inches of freeboard, 10, 15 years from now, that's not going to be qualifying for the insurance stuff. So with a higher sea level, the additional 18 inches we're recommending will keep you in the same kind of insurance category. So there's, as Brent says, there's a lot of moving parts, but it seemed to be what we could do. And the height reservation goes along with it. Just, you're gonna move the floor up, okay, you can still have the same living space inside.
So to go Noah doom and gloom on you, if the 18 inches, 36 inches isn't enough, we're rebuilding the town anyway.
That's right.
You're not worried about saving at that point, you're worried about rebuilding. So the 36 is kind of that sweet spot of palatable, buildable, doable, manageable,
Passable.
passable,
Passable, right.
and functionable. You're not building a finished floor on a commercial building, going to Wawa up here. They're gonna make the business decision. They're probably gonna build to the BFE if they ever decided to build in the floodplain, which I don't think they will, but it's all of those things go into the least resistance of what can be done. If we get a storm that has a 4-foot surge, we're rebuilding. So none of that matters at that point.
Two other comments I wanted to make, because we often refer to, so the folks on the beach, we were very careful in our subcommittee to take a holistic approach. A blind eye to addresses, we stuck with floodplain. So, and I think that's really important, because I think that there's some public who feel that there was a target. No, the target was if you choose to live, again, choose to live in the 1% floodplain, you have a different risk than if you're in the 0.2 or the Alps of Lewes. So it wasn't, beach versus somebody else, because it's not just the beach. And also, floodplains are moving, okay? So as Commissioner Hefner is saying, we struck, it's not even a compromise in my mind, we struck a good next point. And then as Brent says, if we get disasters beyond that, we're rethinking Lewes. One of the things also at the Rascal meeting is that traditionally in the United States has suffered billion-dollar weather events in terms of recovery, about one every 4 months. Last year, one every 3 weeks. Okay, so this is flood, fire, hurricane, tornado, but think about that implication.
Two of them were not hyper-local, but within.
But within range here.
Yeah.
So I feel like what this does for the commercial is we give them a little bit more voluntary because their businesses are so different, but it behooves them to do the right thing and to protect their property, which helps everyone else in the community as well.
Well, if I could just tell a little story. The day we had the 4.5-inch rain, I went out and took some pictures. And I was over near Cedar Street. And one of the alleys there, or Midland, was completely wet. And so I stopped to take a picture. And a woman came out, she had her boots on, and she said, "Can you believe this?" And went on about the water for a bit. And I said, "Well, there's no storm drain here, it just soaks in." She said, "I've already called BPW and the city." And I thought to myself very carefully, do I want to tell her I'm a city planner? So I just let her vent. And then she said they should come and pump it somewhere. And
Where?
when it happens, I'm glad that you two are right there you three, to
We have a grant for that.
but that's an attitude.
I'd also like to add just a little scary personal anecdote here. Early 2000s, when we bought our house, we were not in the flood zone, and we are not on the beach. And this is coming down through the Great Marsh. During Hurricane Sandy, the stormwater came up to my garage door, but no further, and it did eventually recede down through the storm drains. But it started, then the back end of our property was in the storm drain. We actually already had flood insurance because we had chosen to have flood insurance. So it was no big from that perspective. But now my home is in the floodplain, and on these severe rains that I've had in recent, just these last couple weeks, it's puddling and ponding, and that is the subtle way that it's creeping in. It's coming from the ground, and you walk out there and I see my sporting dogs frolicking in the water, fortunately, but, kind of living on a lake. And it's creeped across our road now to, I saw on the latest map, and it was not on your property at all, and now it is coming from the front.
Yeah.
So we need to be cautious and we need to make smart choices as individuals, not just as legislative,
Well,
And I'm happy that the subcommittee has chosen to focus not on addresses,
Right.
but on the floodplain, because I think a lot of residents are not aware that they're in the floodplain. And hopefully this will make more of them aware. I know we're talking commercial, but
Right, but it's
I
everybody.
assume you'll be
Right.
taking a similar approach. I know we could go on forever with flood experiences.
Yeah.
And
And just awareness that
and-
people really should be looking at the maps
maps,
are out there,
yeah.
the Argus maps are out
Exactly.
there.
Yeah.
There is even one called, I think it's Flood IQ, and it gives you a free report for your home and a projection. I don't know how scientific it is, but that information is out there.
Right.
And
And it's actually fairly easy to just plug your address in. Are there any other questions or comments on what's being proposed here? I think we've heard the rationale behind it, et cetera. Is there a motion?
I make a motion that we accept this change to the code.
I
Is there-
second that.
Okay, all in favor?
aye.
It's unanimous. Now, our next item on the agenda, make sure I'm covering all of them here, is C4, and these are the open space definitions. But I'd like to move to C5 first, and that's a discussion to amend the Planning Commission bylaws. And I'm moving to this one for a reason, and you'll see why in a moment. I had a conversation with our counsel, with Mr. Burns, who had mentioned to me that a couple other jurisdictions have in their bylaws a recommended, a agreed upon length of the meeting. And when you hit that, typically an hour and a half, and when you hit that hour and a half point, the commission would then have an opportunity to vote to extend the meeting or agree to postpone items to the next meeting. And having, one of my New Year's resolutions was to try to handle these meetings more efficiently so that we don't go so late into the evening at times. I think, in a sense, having this as a deadline
Yeah.
when we're discussing topics might focus minds, and it also still gives us the opportunity, if we're in the middle of something, that we feel another 15 minutes or a half an hour would get us to completion, we would have the opportunity to do that. So I don't know whether you would like to comment more on this.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. You covered most of it. Just quickly, I should touch on bylaws in general. They flow from the city code, so to the extent a bylaw is in conflict with the city code, the bylaw would fail. But there are gaps within the city code that bylaws can fill, and this is one of them. I don't take credit for this idea of having a somewhat of a safety valve to, by default, end a meeting after a certain time. And as you mentioned, the chair could entertain a motion to extend the meeting if that's desirable. And the only thing I'll add is that this is on the agenda as a discussion item, there's not to be a vote tonight, because the bylaws require 10 days of written notice to the commission members. And we discussed this last week, so unfortunately we can't vote on it today. I could prepare something we could vote on at the next meeting.
But you may have wondered why we had the bylaws attached, just to, yeah. So go ahead.
I had a question. When they vote to extend, is that done in increments? So as she suggested, would it be 30 more minutes, but let's vote on that? Or is it just simply an open, do you want to go longer?
It could be either way. I was anticipating an open-ended continuation of the meeting. That's how I've seen it in other jurisdictions, but it's definitely an option to extend it for another hour or half hour. Those are on the table.
I have a question I'd like to ask, 2 questions. Is this 30-minute, 15-minute increment that you're speaking of, would that be established at the very beginning, at the onset of the meeting, or when you're coming up on that 1.5 hour target? How is that done in these other jurisdictions? And I have a follow-up.
Yeah, the way I've seen it with the Rehoboth Planning Commission is at 4:30, so their meetings start in the afternoon at 4:30. That's when they take the vote whether they're going to adjourn or continue. So it could be done at the beginning of the meeting. The chair has discretion as to the flow of the meeting, and you could entertain a motion in the beginning if we drafted the bylaw that way, but that's certainly an idea.
And I assume we could, when we're scheduling a meeting, if we know it's a long agenda, we could agree at our next meeting, it's going to be a 3-hour meeting, and maybe we start a little earlier, whatever.
I see. Okay. And a follow-up question. Does council have the option of also, because, sign me up. And the answer is?
You do, and one more thing I should add to that is that the bylaws anticipate that they will be reviewed and approved by council, so it would technically be a recommendation to council.
Council, yeah. So I just wanted to open this up to discussion now, if we would like to have Alex and or Janelle draft something that would be a change to the bylaws.
Can I suggest we take 2 hours to discuss this?
No.
I think this is an excellent discussion, and my thought would be to, in general, unless there were a very packed agenda, to wait until we reach time to
Yes, yeah.
to suggest, okay, we need another 15 minutes or another half an hour. Meetings expand to fill available time. And having this kind of discipline, I just think would be family friendly and just keep everything on track. So I strongly would endorse having Alex draft up something for our consideration to recommend to City Council.
I agree. I think an hour and a half is not enough time, because I think historically our meetings have gone at least 2 hours and frequently 4 hours. But I think 2 hours would be perhaps a better cutoff than an hour and a half.
I would agree with that, the 2 hours, I
Yeah,
think
I think that's
is reasonable as well. My New Year's resolution was to go to bed earlier, so.
I would also agree that 90 minutes would not be long enough. I have 2 concerns. Number one, the rolling over of topics. It's, that we deal with a lot of business, and sometimes these meetings do get long. But at least we leave usually having covered a full agenda. And I don't like the idea of continuing a meeting. Once I'm into it and working, I would prefer to kick it through. That's my personal feeling. My other feeling is a little more out there, and it's just that we have such a wealth of human resource here and in Greater Lewes and in our community, and to put a time limit on it, on people's ideas, that sometimes that's how great things happen in this town, is by having enough time to think about them and talk about them. I lots of times consider other viewpoints or ideas are brought up here in discussions of applications that maybe I hadn't thought of. And I think that some of us come with different areas that we're interested in. And if we couldn't fully flesh those out at the meetings, I think that might be a loss to the committee as a whole.
I hear you in terms of that, and it's, you know, I'm probably the one person here who's had a little while to think about about this. And when it was first proposed, I said, hey, I want a little while to think about it, and then said, well, let's put it on the agenda and talk about it. I think one thing that it might do is it might mean that we schedule some interim meetings on topics so we can really delve into them. Likewise, I think it may mean that we're a little more disciplined in some of the topics that, quite frankly, we may spend longer on than we need to because, I don't know, we just each have something to say, you know. But we still have the opportunity to extend the meeting. I am, on the other hand, also concerned that we've had meetings where we've gone so late that we are tired and we may not be getting those ideas.
Right.
That it's best, you know, ideas flow more when you're alert and not looking at your watch and worrying, you know.
May I ask one more question? This suggestion, would it be applicable only to meetings or to hearings as well?
It could be framed either way. I imagine if it was a hearing, there would be more desire to a greater desire to continue on with the meeting, just because continuing the public hearing would require you to renotice the meeting, and
Sure.
it could be a little more burdensome on the city to do it that way. But that's an excellent question. There could be a distinction in the bylaw that we draft.
I mean, my thoughts on this is I don't think we ever want to be limiting what we hear from the public.
Right.
And while we do set time limits and we ask them to, you know, if they have longer comments, to provide those in writing, I think since we've started being a little bit more disciplined about that and more disciplined about the time spent on preliminary presentations, our hearings have tended not to go on quite as long as they had before. But I would think we'd want, I'd prefer not to see hearings in this in terms of, we always, I think whether we've set a time limit or not, we have the option of voting to adjourn the meeting and to, you know, resume a topic or
Yes.
even resume a hearing at a later date. You know, if we had 500 people show up, even at 3 minutes each, even at 1 minute each, we would never get through them in a reasonable period of time, and, you know.
And, oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
And speaking of hearings, we do have a time limit for the public, but have we ever looked at a time limit for the developers or for the
We
applicants?
have it right now.
Okay.
Yeah, we've been doing that. And when I said the presentations are time limited, that's
Right,
the,
okay.
yeah.
I think we can do things on the hearings that I think the public would like, which is keeping them open as long as they need to be, but register. So one of the things I've seen in other jurisdictions is you register your name to speak, and then the chair says, Ms. Marosco, Mr. Brown, and then you say, does anybody else want to speak? That allows it to move, and people know they're going to be heard, they prepare. I think it's a little more orderly. And I'm very mixed about the interaction. I'm much more familiar with the public hearing where we just say, thank you for your comment, thank you for your comment.
Yeah.
But it's so frustrating, and because sometimes you just know you could answer that person's question. So we vary a lot, and so that might be worth a discussion to say, you know, the chair can interact, but nobody else. I see at Mayor City Council that it varies, and the mayor has solved problems on the spot by being able to answer. So that, I think hearings we need to look at hearings. They're their own animal. I think the 2-hour recommendation for this is good, and I think that if we know something's gonna be longer, as we have done, we start early, or we do an interim meeting. The 1-month gap is too long to pick up business unless it's definitions. I'm just teasing you.
Yeah, and then we're going to have, who knows what will come up in that month, so
That's
we'll
right,
have,
yeah.
the idea of carrying
Other
it
things
over
coming
is,
over,
yeah.
is concerning.
There's also, because you put this on, I had no idea what we were going to talk about. It says in our bylaws that we meet at 6 o'clock. Okay. Or a time, okay, because I was always confused by that. And then
Yeah.
the other thing, given we're just in discussion, personally, I like that the planning commission is filled by people who live here. But I also can appreciate that you could have a minority that own here,
Yeah.
maybe, because
I'm
there's
glad
this.
Amy introduced it. I was actually gonna go down
okay.
that road
Go
too,
ahead.
Because that would be more of probably a code change, because it is spelled out in our code,
In
the
code,
makeup
yeah.
of the committee, but I like where you're going
Yeah.
here, which is when we talked about, enfranchisement of property owners who are not full-time residents. One of the things that we discussed is how could we potentially involve them more? Now, maybe, I know Rehoboth had this, right, Alex, and recently have voted to go back, revert to it, but again, maybe the structure wasn't working. To your point is, we allow 9 members. Maybe we have a structure where if you have a full complement of 9, 2 of them could be.
A maximum of 2.
Exactly, and
Right.
as soon as you get down to that minimum max, then you're gonna have to go.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
There's a way to control.
Way to
still get the
control that.
voice.
Yeah.
And it would not be representative of non-resident members of the community, correct? I mean, it would not be designated.
No, they're not like an
Oh, no,
HOA
no,
rep.
no,
No, they're just a
no.
person who
They're a
owns.
person
Yeah,
who doesn't actually
Yeah.
have, they're not domiciled
yeah,
here.
Exactly.
They
Correct.
own-
Yeah,
They own, they're not
Correct.
domiciled here, and yet they're willing to serve on the
Yeah.
commission.
Yeah.
So,
Matt?
And-
would you mind including, because like, obviously that would require a charter change on our side, but would you mind providing a recommendation on that aspect?
I think we need to have a discussion on
That's
that,
fine.
Yep.
you know, and certainly, we are not elected, so it's not, you know,
Right.
But your thoughts
Yeah.
as as part of the recommendation, I would ask if you say whether it's a good idea, something you would support or not, and under what circumstances.
let's put it on our agenda for the next meeting, because I'm trying to do.
See, here I was
do
ready to jump
firm-
right in.
Firm agenda management, because we still, remember, I pulled this up, we still have that good old definitions and open space discussion, and I know it's one that people want to
May
cover.
I interrupt you and just jump in and make one real quick suggestion? I'm
you
gonna
just-
pick up on a statement that Commissioner Marasco spoke to, and it was about the business of registering. I think it would actually be very helpful for the planning commission. I actually think this would be helpful for all of our committees and commissions, that there was a practice of registration for everyone who actually attends the meeting. So when they walk in the room and take a seat, they might not be here to actually expect to speak, but it would be helpful if we had a record of how many members of the public were in attendance at our meetings. And I would also suggest that, if you like this idea, that you include the number of people who are attending via Zoom, because it validates your work. Right.
The challenge with Zoom is we can ask people to type in, but I don't know of a way to compel them to. I mean, I guess we could push them out of the meeting if they didn't respond by doing that.
I thought by Zoom you had to register.
But you can
Yeah, you
register
do
as
have
Mickey Mouse.
You can put any name
Any
in
name
there.
you want to.
You can put any
You
name
can do
in.
Mickey Mouse.
Yeah, I don't care
Right.
about the name. I'm just talking about count.
Oh,
Oh,
you're
the
looking
count,
at.
account, okay.
Because right
okay,
now,
yeah. Yeah.
there's one member of the public here and
Yeah.
no one online,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, but what
it
isn't-
validates your efforts by having,
Yeah.
you can,
You also don't know how many people are going back into YouTube
And listen.
You
watch.
do
Yeah.
though, is what I was gonna say, is my husband is a fan of watching the meetings on YouTube. And he'll give me a report when I get home of how many people were, 'cause, he'll be like, 21 other people were watching along with me. Because somewhere on that screen, it says that. But I don't know that if you go back later, if you're viewing it in real time live, you can see it.
Yeah,
How many
it
people
does.
are online
Yeah.
with you.
It does.
Yeah.
It counts.
On the
How many
whole,
views total?
on the whole registration thing, I have been in other situations where I think it's very helpful to have that sign-up list.
Yeah.
Right.
Because when you sign up, you know you're number 5, and when you see number 4 speaking, you're ready to get up. Whereas we often have long, silences waiting to see who wants to come forward next.
That
So,
would be a good way of managing that.
yeah.
And we have
Okay,
never
so-
done that before, because I feel like,
We-
it's just at the county that we do that, right?
Yeah, yeah.
The state park meeting for the
Yeah.
restaurants,
Right.
they
Yeah.
did that.
And I've gone out and spoken
Yeah.
to the
Yeah.
county, and
Lots of
that's
other
why.
The
meetings.
county
do it,
has
yeah.
a sign-in sheet, if
That's
you
what I was
would wish to
confusing it
speak,
with.
and then staff would, like, right before the public hearing, go pick
Mm.
it up and then call the people up.
But again, my
Okay,
se-
so I think we are going to be asking Alex to come back with something, a draft of 2 items. One would be extending, setting a limit of 2 hours to the meeting, at which point we can vote to extend it. The second is a discussion of something around being able to appoint members to the planning commission, maximum of 2 out of a full complement of 9, who may be property owners but non-residents.
That sounds good. And
Okay.
the latter would be a code change, a
Yes.
possible code
Yes.
change.
Yes.
The former would be
Yes.
a bylaw change.
Yeah, and these would both be, as we all know, will only be making recommendations. The sign-up sheet, we can,
I did.
MAR.
the sign-up sheet, we can implement without any, that's an administrative thing. Okay, I'm going to move back
Just
to,
a quick question, Madam Chair. On the registering to speak, are we thinking about that people would register to speak, but that others who just showed up could also speak?
They just speak after the registers.
I'm thinking of registration as being a sign-in list,
Yes.
not a prior registration where you've shown ID and, taken an oath. Okay,
So the way it's worked in other places, the people who sign in go first,
Yeah.
and then anybody
then you
else
open it.
goes after that.
Okay, okay, on to C4. Discussion and possible recommendation to mayor and city council regarding changes to and creation of definitions of open space in chapter 170, subdivision and land development. And I have to say, I had taken this as discussion of both definitions of open space, but what we're putting in the code. Because when I looked at what I think members of the Planning Commission are interested in discussing, it goes beyond the written definition. And so I'm going to pass out now a series of discussion, topics. Oh, it's just one per person.
This one page, I have,
You have
what you attached, it was attached to our agenda, unless it's not. Did you modify what was attached to our agenda?
It got added to the agenda at the last minute. Yeah, many people wouldn't have it. Let me pass more around there. So, having
2
been the
pages?
person on the subcommittee that worked on the revisions to the subdivision code, one of the topics we spent a lot of time on was open space. So I pulled out the old issues that we had discussed, and I think there's a sense, and correct me if I'm wrong, my fellow commissioners, that as we've looked at how operationally this has been applied, that we didn't quite get it to where we wanted it to be. And so I thought it was worthwhile looking back at these issues. And so one of the issues was the dimensions of open space. And we had discussed whether there should be minimum dimensions, minimum area, and minimum ratio. A minimum dimension would be to say, no single dimension of the open space could be less than X feet. Another way, and keep in mind, these issues came from doing a review of open space code in other jurisdictions and looking at what they had in place. So these aren't things that I just, that we just kind of pulled out of our head. The second is looking at what's the size of an area that would qualify as open space. And we've seen this with some, little slivers or little triangles, contributing, summing up to the required amount of open space. And then the third, which I think is kind of interesting, is looking at some set the ratio. So it's the ratio between length and width. I'm not quite sure how they do this with irregularly shaped areas, but maybe it's the maximum, I don't know. And that the ratio cannot be greater than something like the ratio that I saw in some codes was 4:1, which basically would exclude a really long narrow. Those were some of the things. Another thing that is sometimes delineated is what the slope can be of the land in open space. The idea being we don't get enough snow here that any community would want a sledding hill as their open space or a minor ski hill as their open space. The next is whether there's ready accessibility to the space. Things like saying it has to be within a 5-minute walk of all lots. I'm not sure how you measure walking speed, but I guess one can figure out a reasonable speed. The other is adjacency, that, and we have this down, that we desire it to be contiguous with, adjacent open areas or greenways. And then I added this fifth one, which we'd never talked about before, and labeled it delineation of open space. And that is that there are clear boundaries between private lots and open spaces that can be used by residents. The concept being, if it's not clear, you don't feel comfortable thinking you could be walking in someone's backyard. Similarly, if it's not clear, over time, and I can speak from experience, having once had open space behind our house, and yes, we over time put our garden out in the open space like half of our neighbors did. We did not own that land, but there is this human tendency of either expanding because you're not quite sure where your property line is, and hey, you've been mowing this for a while, so this must be ours. I'll put the sandbox out there for the kids. They'll have a longer distance to walk before they come into the house with sand on their feet. Or to see mom.
Could I interrupt for a minute? I think rather than going through all these kinds of criteria, that rather we define what we want the open space to be. So, for example, we've seen many subdivisions where all of the perimeter buffer area is considered open space, and yet it's really not usable. But if we were to say, for example, that there must be a central open space that's non-programmed, meaning there's not a swimming pool on it, it's a space where kids can fly a kite, where toss a ball, whatever it might be, and that it is a certain proportion of the total site area, that we might get what we're really looking for.
Well, I think we need to, I actually took those as coming from what I thought were our concerns over it. I wasn't planning to go through the rest of them, by the way. But let me pass out what our current code is, because we currently have numbers down for the amount of open space, the amount that's contiguous, et cetera. And I think it's worthwhile, I agree with you, let's have a discussion of what the problem is. I think we've had several problems that this commission has raised. One is this sense of long, narrow strips. Another is small, little plots being added together.
Right.
Another, which we didn't really state in the code before, I think clearly enough, is whether BMP areas were going to be considered or not. And when we saw a very attractive BMP, we said, yes, we'll count that as open space. But the actual code didn't address that, and that gives me some discomfort. And then the third is just the location of it. You know, at the outer boundary, you know, we say we want it to be contiguous with other open space. The neighbors have a buffer, and then because we said contiguous, it, I think, has tended to push some of that open space to the boundaries.
Right, right.
I think the verbiage that Melanie used with central open space is a phrase that I wrote down, because I think that's one to hold on to and bookmark.
Something I thought was missing was protection of habitat.
Mhm.
And, you know, we saw that with people's concern about the nesting areas for birds around White's Pond, that sort of thing. And there's nothing here about habitat protection.
I think
Madam
we
Chair.
actually have
Wait a
habitat
second, there's
in
two-
the, I
there's
think
two
we do
different
have this
pages.
in the
Give me one
code.
of those back.
But the problem, the issue becomes, what are we putting in intent statements? And what are we putting in actual requirements?
Madam Chair, I think this conversation is important, critically important, because I think our frustration has been the feeling that developments that come in front of us meet code, but not the spirit, just as you said. I think one step in this process would be following what Commissioner Mosher says, which is this general conversation of what do we really want. Then what I would entertain would be a developer meeting, not about any specific development. Bring the developers in, let them listen to what we want, and have them tell us, in their world, how would that be translated? Because I think there would be some insights there for us that we might be surprised. I know this with the trees particularly, because we put in a number and then we get back, that's too strict. What were you really trying to accomplish? And we say, more trees. And so I just think that's a step in the process that I think would be really valuable, because we're in a nice pause right now with development projects. So it would be nice that it wasn't particular to any one development. But I'd love to hear our concepts and then have a back and forth with developers and landscape designers to say, what are we talking about? Or how can we translate this eventually into code in a language that you can comply with, instead of just doing the math, which is what it's felt like lately. Yeah.
I just wanted to be the devil's advocate to that and say, in my experience on this committee, what I've seen is that we've addressed this code and we've tried to make it as tight as we can, and that the developer's goal has been to find loopholes, and they have. And we need to close the loopholes, because we don't have that much land left. That's the
Well,
only
that's true.
reason also why at this point, I'm not sure that I would like to spend my time hearing that.
Unless there's annexation in the future. I mean, I agree with you.
Yeah.
We're almost built out, but if annexation occurs, I'd want to make sure our toolbox has more things in it.
Yeah.
So the only reason I'd just like a developer to say, oh, you're trying to get this, here's how you could get there. It's like regulators like to hear from the people they regulate what their reaction is before they make their decision to regulate. Doesn't mean we have to go with it, but it's a different mind, clearly. So just a
And
process
I guess
step.
my intention tonight is, we had this down originally as discussing the open space definitions. And as I looked at it, it went far beyond the definitions. It's not the definition of what the definition describing, usable open space, et cetera. We need to really, I think, look back over things that have come before us that were problematic, and identify where did the problems come in, and to your point, Melanie, identify what is it that we really want. I think we think we have an idea of what we want, but perhaps when we really get into discussing it, we'll have multiple, views on it. And I take on your suggestion that we need to speak to developers. The point is, this is bigger than this meeting,
Yes, right.
and it's going to take work. It's not going to happen in 1 to 2 meetings even. And I suspect that we need a subgroup to work on this. And I know we're down to to 2 subcommittees, housing and environmental. So I'm hoping that we'll have people interested in working on this, because I think it's an important topic.
No, I would like to work on it.
I just want to say I agree,
Would-
and I think that Commissioner Marasco's suggestion about getting some advice from developers themselves is a very good one. And actually, especially with a developer that we feel is trustworthy, to ask them to actually game it from the other side. Okay, looking at what we've come up with, how could you find the loopholes in this that you could exploit? Because what came before this commission recently was just a dog, and it was something that was looked at with every possible loophole looking that was trying to be exploited to see where they could get away with the minimum amount of open space, and that was just one problem with it. So I think that we're I think that we need to, and maybe the horse is already out of the barn here, but we could have annexations, and I do think we need to get this right going forward. And I strongly agree that we need to just take a look at this as a model.
We also have a comp plan. The mayor and city council will have the new comp plan, and open space, just as 2 words, clearly means something different, we've learned. So I think our work as a committee, subcommittee, would be really good to help that process as well.
And certainly in zoning, the meaning of open space does have a very specific and different definition that would be
Right.
typically in the comp plan. Now, I have turned to Commissioner Moser, who has kindly agreed to chair this subcommittee, and I'm hoping there will be other volunteers to be part of it.
I'm happy to be a volunteer on that committee.
I as well.
Okay, good. We have a committee of 3,
Correct.
which sounds good, and we'll look to hearing more from you in the future.
Okay.
Okay. Now, before I declare success in terms of bringing this meeting in a reasonable period of time, we will hear the reports from the subcommittees and then from our liaisons. So, Environmental Subcommittee.
You heard the main things from us. I just want to let you know that our next topic is wetlands and dark sky lighting. Those are the 2 that we'll be working on.
Housing Subcommittee.
We are working hard to schedule a meeting, but we have had what I'll call a breakthrough, I think. East Hampton, New York is a town that has a established ADU program. Since 2016, they have found ways to manage and control it. So Alex is looking through their code to see what is still legal in Delaware that we might borrow to keep ADUs from becoming short-term rentals. So when we can schedule a meeting, we will take that up.
On to our liaisons and others. Mr. Burns, anything?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have anything. Just to touch on what Commissioner Heffernan said, I think East Hampton could be a great model for Lewes to look at.
Ms. Cornwell?
So at the last meeting for the mayor and city council, they scheduled for, they have a total of 4 scheduled public hearings on February 5th. One for the tree protection, one to discuss residential freeboard, one to discuss the pervious, impervious surfaces definition, and then one for a potential reduction in lot coverage. So those will be February 5th. And they also held the public hearings for both Henlopen Bluff and White's Pond Preserve.
Those are all on the 5th?
All 4 public hearings are on February 5th.
They held the other two.
Okay.
Yeah, the subdivisions were already held, so they held those last week. But there will be 4 public hearings on those proposed ordinances on February 5th.
Okay. Now, I'm never sure when I turn to the city,
Well, Tim could add some
I know
color.
Tim is our liaison, but with our mayor here,
Janelle gave one of the updates, so we had the hearing on the subdivisions. They're likely to be on our next regularly scheduled meeting, which I think is the 8th, is the 12th? 12th of February. And so I think we left the record open to that Friday, which is the
9th. At
noon
noon.
time. Let's see. Yeah, we have a joint capital projects meeting coming up on Monday with BPW. Annexation was brought up, so I'll hand this back over to Tim, but he's part of himself, Councilperson Saliba, and is it Jones are going to be studying the annexation of what's known as the Warrington property. I think it's the 19th, right?
Yeah, for this coming Friday, right. And that is the parcel that is adjacent to the development that's being, how would we describe it, the lodge, and also
It's Harvest, Dutchman's Harvest.
Dutchman's Harvest. So
Oh,
it's
right.
and kind of tucked behind Mr. P's.
Yeah.
You know,
Between the Kings and Savannah.
they've asked to come in under an R5, right? Which is R5, yeah, which is a mixed, not mixed use in the sense of there'll be retail space, but mixed in the sense of they're asking for some apartments, some single family, some condos. Ultimately, it will be up to the subcommittee to recommend to council, 1, whether to accept as annexation, 2, what zoning will be assigned. So because they've asked doesn't necessarily mean they'll get, so.
anything else to add?
I have nothing to add. I think he suggested I add some color to it. I have nothing. I didn't bring my crayons.
Ms. Curtis? And before we turn to you, I want to thank you for your active participation on the environmental and subcommittees and participation here. It's
Well, it's my pleasure.
a
Thank
pleasure
you.
to have the link with BPW. That's
First of all, the BPW's regular monthly meeting is on the 24th. It starts at 4 in City Council chambers. But we've also scheduled or are about to notice a special meeting on the 29th. And that will be for presentation of the report from the wastewater contingency committee, looking at what we've come up with for options 1, which is from the GHD study. Option 1 is hardening the existing facility, and option 2 is building new. So that will be a special meeting. It will be at 10 a.m. on the 29th in council chambers.
And the answer is yes.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. You know, you've been so helpful. It's been a very,
It's been really interesting.
yeah,
Very interesting.
yes.
Yeah.
And thank you, Tim, also for your participation. And yes.
Yeah. It would be very helpful if the public, there was a public turned out and really participated, or at least listened to the presentation, would be very, very helpful.
You may not have enough space in the council chambers, I don't know.
Well, that would be a welcome change for BPW meeting.
Yes.
They would welcome that. And in fact, I think Mr. Scholl here, the reporter from Cape Gazette that would be a lead story. SRO. Please.
Okay. Before we close the meeting, I will go one more time for any public comment, since we had one. Oh, they're gone. Shucks.
They're gone.
Well, I'd like to point out that we're missing by, if I speak quickly, I'll hit it on 8 o'clock.
Excellent.
We will adjourn this meeting after exactly 1.5 hours of discussion, so.
Yeah.
A good start to our new year.
Yeah, excellent.
But we don't have to start to stay 2 hours.
Yeah, that's,
Yes, you're not allowed, the doors will be locked for another half hour.
okay, we're done? We're done?
Are you adjourned?
The meeting is now adjourned, yes.